Congressman Adam Smith, Senator Tina Orwall of Washington's 33rd Legislative District, and Port of Seattle Commission President Ryan Calkins. Thank you all for being here. Before we get into the Q&A portion of this evening, I would like to turn to Congressman Smith to provide some opening remarks.
Certainly. Thank you all for being here, and thank Laura and my staff in general for helping organize this. It's great to be here with Tina and Ryan. Appreciate their leadership. There's several different issues that we're working on. The overview, of course, is as the port goes through the SAMP process, it's really important to strengthen the connections between the community. I was talking with somebody right before we got started, and I do think we made progress. You know, back in the 80s when I first started working on this issue, basically the cities, the school districts were all suing the port. They were all, you know, there was all kinds of anger. It was difficult to have a conversation, difficult to work on the issue. Because look, it's a difficult issue. You know, it's a major regional hub. We need an airport. People fly all over the place. It's critical to the economy. But having spent my entire life and growing up in this area, they're tough neighbors. It's noisy. We've got pollution issues. There's a lot of traffic. How do we manage that? Well, step one is to have open lines of communication. And I think for too long, back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, that really wasn't the case. But I want to give a shout out to Tina in particular and Karen Kaiser, who preceded you. Two of them have really gone to bat to try to build that better, stronger relationship to deal with those issues. That doesn't resolve it, but at least we have some open lines of communication. And in terms of what our priorities are, a couple of issues: noise, obviously, the noise mitigation process. One big thing that we were able to do is to carve out some money for upgrading noise, because the issue is once they build a barrier, it's like whether it works or not, whether it's in the right place or not, you can't get the money for that. So we worked through that in legislation to help do that. And we want to make sure that the noise studies are consistent and they actually show where the noise is, and then they help people with the mitigation process. Second big thing is pollution. For a long time, we ignored it completely. We now have a couple of different studies going on the federal level, University of Washington, to figure out what is the impact of jet fuel particles falling down on the community, figure out that impact, and then figure out ways to mitigate it in the same way that we mitigate the noise. Next big issue is trying to get to alternative sources of fuel that have less of a pollution impact. Obviously, in an ideal world, we could have electric planes. There's a few complications around that, but it is more possible, certainly for short flights. And I don't know what the percentage is, right? What percentage of flights come out of Sea-Tac that are within 250 miles or whatever, but it's higher than you might think. So continuing to develop alternative, electric planes, but also alternative fuel sources. That maybe burn cleaner and have less of a pollution impact. And those are the overall priorities we're trying to do. I guess the last thing is just to take sort of a victory lap on the North Sea-Tac Park. We finally got the port and everybody agree it is going to be the North Sea-Tac Park going forward. Working out some of the details on that. That's something we were able to get into legislation. I guess last thank you I want to throw out there, my colleague Rick Larson, who is the ranking member on the Transportation Committee, worked a lot of these issues for me as we were going through FAA reauthorization. So really appreciate him being open to working with us here in the airport impacted community. So with that, I'll look forward to your questions and turn it over to my colleagues.
Great. Well, good afternoon. Tina Orwall, State Senator from the 33rd. Welcome to the 33rd. I know that's your home turf. And just want to first thank you for your leadership. I hear from people all over the country that are worried about airport impacts, and you are seen as one of our national leaders. So I want to say thank you to you and your staff. But thank you for being here, Commissioner, and I'm glad we're having this dialogue. I can't imagine there's anyone in this room that doesn't think having one of the fastest growing airports does not impact our health and quality of life. And having raised my kids here, I know when they were young and my son would come home with asthma, I kept thinking, gosh, that must be, a mold in the school. It never occurred to me that part or a possible impact was aviation fuels. And I think that's where we've kind of changed our knowledge to this is just about noise, to this is actually about health impacts. And with, I call it the trifecta, our community leaders, our universities, and government, we've really looked at what are ultrafine particles. We learned from the University of Washington that they are heavily concentrated. They're concentrated upon landing, and that's why it depends on where they're fueled, where that fuel comes from. We know that in King County, children are 57% more likely to seek care in emergency department for asthma in our area versus any other part of King County. And we know that's probably a complex reason, but we know that there's things we can be doing around air quality, like mitigation, like purifiers, like, making sure they're in our schools and our homes. We have an asthma intervention, and it's a small, I think we spend about $600,000 a year, but it's helping kids with purifiers, vacuums, intervention, and it's had a huge success. But it's also a small program. We know there was one young girl that a week before she was supposed to start, she passed away. We just know that the need is so great. And when I think about the airport, I think there's a cumulative impact. When we think about Stanford expansion, we're thinking more cargo, more international, which will be more evening flights. And between the noise and the air pollution, I feel like our ask to the port is we want to be a partner. We're glad you're here, we're glad you're listening, but we need an action plan. What can we be doing around noise, especially evening noise? What can we be doing about air pollution? We have funding sources that I believe should be carving out a percentage for mitigation for this community. And often that's an afterthought. So again, I feel like there's so much that we can do to make the lives of people in our area better, but it's gonna take working together to get there.
Thank you so much for the opening remarks, and I want to share some remarks that wrote ahead of time. I want to make sure I get the details right too, because I know this is critically important to all of you, and you think about this a lot, so bear with me as I read through some of these. In particular, I want to say thank you to Congressman Smith and to Senator Orwall, and I know we've got other elected officials here, Councilmember Davis, and I think I just saw King County Councilmember Fain arrive. Thank you for coming today. For us, I want to talk about the work that the port has been doing with the local communities, and at the same time, some of the steps that we can take collectively to make progress on these shared concerns. We know that concerns around aircraft noise and emissions continue to be of concern to all of you and to all of our community members around the airport. On the emissions front, as Congressman Smith mentioned, we are doing everything we can to speed up the implementation of sustainable aviation fuels, which not only produce less carbon, but also fewer air particulates, which, as Senator Orwall has mentioned, could potentially pose risks to human health. On the noise side, the port has been instituting its award-winning noise programs for decades. We've successfully insulated over 9,400 homes along with multiple Highland Public School buildings. We continue to also work on apartments, condominiums, places of worship, and we've increased our focus on delivering this relief as quickly as possible. But I know that insulation is not sufficient, that the buildings are one aspect, but we actually need to also find ways to not just mitigate, but actually reduce the noise as a result of our operations. Reducing noise is one of the best ways that we can be a good neighbor to your communities. So we're pursuing that goal in two ways. First, with operational changes that can make an impact immediately for your communities, and then pursuing longer-term policy changes that can make a big difference in the coming years. On the operational front, one of the biggest wins is the runway use agreement we have with the FAA. While it's still a voluntary program, it asks air traffic controllers to avoid using the third runway, the one most close to your communities, between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m. And the results have been significant. Late night operations on the third runway have dropped from an average of 12 late night landings a night to an average of less than 1 late night landing a night during routine operating conditions. Similarly, we've instituted new guidelines to airline pilots using SAA, both discouraging the use of reverse thrust on landings, as well as encouraging continuous taxi to takeoffs, which reduce the need to power up at the runway end before takeoff. Both of these changes were as a result of the ground noise study that our SEA Stakeholder Advisory Roundtable, or START, developed. We have also developed programs that incentivize airlines to operate the most modern and quiet aircraft at SEA. This includes our Fly Quiet program, which honors 3 airlines for their efforts in this regard each year. Our focus on policy change is important because the port is extremely limited in its ability to directly impact aircraft noise and emissions issues, which are exclusively regulated by the EPA and the FAA. Beyond voluntary guidelines and our noise insulation program, we need federal partnerships in order to provide new tools, new authorities, new resources, new approaches, and new FAA engagement that can make a tangible difference. Again, through START, we are proud to have developed a list of federal policies jointly supported by the port and the airport cities, several of which have been supported and, quite honestly, achieved as a result of Congressman Smith and his effort in DC. Thanks to his leadership, the Sound Insulation Treatment and Replacement Program Act was passed in 2025, and it created an FAA pilot program to repair or replace previously installed sound insulation packages. This was a big win for community and shows how we can work together on shared priorities. Many of you probably know that SEA can only do noise insulation for homes within the area around the airport where noise exposure is above FAA's currently prescribed average of 65 decibels a day over a year-long period. The FAA, again with the support of Congressman Smith, is developing an updated noise policy and is in the process of initiating an aircraft noise advisory committee. And one of the focus areas is re-examining its noise policy, including whether that is the right measurement tool or exposure level to address noise annoyance. We strongly supported this work by Congressman Smith and others and are excited that FAA is taking on this effort and including airport community stakeholders as part of that committee. The port has been advocating that community stakeholders be included in the decision-making process and excited to see that the FAA is including community input. We anticipate that SEA will be a key part of that conversation. And on the topic of the FAA in particular, as commissioner and as carrying on a legacy of other commissioners who have been working on these issues for a while, it can be quite frustrating how limited our ability to make decisions around many of these issues. For instance, we don't get to set noise or aircraft emission limits. We don't get to institute an evening curfew. We don't get to limit the number of aircraft coming into or out of the airport. We don't have control over which aircraft the airlines use or whether they choose to switch to quieter engines. I'm not saying this to dodge responsibility, but it is important for people to understand where the power over many of these issues resides and why efforts like those of the START Committee have been the most effective at instituting real change at the federal level. I just want to close by saying that a big part of us being the best neighbor possible is not only reducing the negatives about living near an airport, but also increasing the positives. From our South King County and Port Communities Fund, making direct investments in the community, to our workforce development programs that give local residents the skills and access and opportunities that the port is creating. We want SEA to be a net positive for your communities, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you to achieve that vision. Thank you again to Representative Smith for bringing us together today.
Thanks.
Thank you to all of our panelists. We are now going to transition into a question and answer portion of this afternoon. If you'd like to ask a question of our panelists, we'll have you line up on this back wall, and my colleague Keelan will be here monitoring the line and having the microphone for you as you ask your questions. Just to begin, we did receive some pre-submitted questions, and I'm just going to ask one of those pre-submitted questions to get us started. This will be for all of our panelists. And just a reminder that the green button is when the microphone is on. Can everyone hear pretty well at the back there as well? Okay. Well, you can also transition to.
Do we have to hold it up closer to our mouths, or?
Yes.
Is that better?
Okay.
Okay, so we can use, is this better for me as well?
So is this projecting at all?
No.
Looks like
We have some.
I asked the person at the back who said there wasn't a microphone in the room. So I didn't even know there was.
Yeah.
And a piece.
Thanks.
How's this? Is this any better?
No.
How about this?
Nope.
Okay, we will project.
But you naturally have a soft voice, so you're gonna have to really yell, because I sit in here and I can barely hear you.
matter about it. The system just doesn't.
Did someone turn the on switch on? Seriously, maybe it's on the podium.
feel like.
Usually there's a closet, there's
Yeah.
a room system.
All right, well, let's get started while we're waiting. We'll try to project as loudly as we can. Go ahead.
Yeah, apologies for these, for the technical difficulties. I'll start with just a pre-submitted question, then we'll get to the line as you folks line up. The question is, what will you do to defend and protect the environment and quality of life for airport communities and around the region?
Well, I think I outlined that a little bit around the airport community. It's about noise and air pollution, but I think also just in general, protecting the environment. I mean, you know, air, water quality. You know, I'm deeply concerned about what the federal government is not doing right now to continue to protect those things under the Trump administration's EPA. So I think we need to renew a commitment to the environment. And yes, I think climate change is part of that, air, water quality, all part of it. We need to aggressively enforce regulations to protect the environment in general, but particularly around the airport, noise mitigation, and I think the air pollution thing is huge. Identifying it, shifting over to alternative sources of fuel, figuring out ways to protect the community from that impact. Like I said, that's going to be at the top of the list of priorities.
Well, I'm going to add to that, and I agree with everything Adam said. I do think some of the priorities, which I strongly support, like cleaner fuels and a lot of the environmental things, are years off, because the pollution really is about where they fuel. And so I do want to make sure we're doing short-term strategies around the pollution. And I do think that's the use of the HEPA purifiers that needs to be around. I do think we need more indoor spaces for recreation than other areas do. And I think the noise packages, again, I know the federal government is trying to do pilots, but it may take some years before they change the 65 DNL, but that doesn't mean there's not local resources that can't be doing this work now. So again, I think it's the short-term investment along with the partnerships on longer term.
So I'm a port commissioner part-time. My full-time day job is working as an energy policy advisor for an organization called the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. And my 40-hour-a-week job is to try to figure out how to use energy more effectively. And we have a sort of mantra, which is whenever you're approaching a question like this, whether your goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or local particulate emissions, or just simply to reduce energy use because it costs a lot of money to use energy, there's a sort of three-step process. You start with efficiency. So what you're trying to do with efficiency is use less energy generally. And so some of the initiatives that have been most effective at SEA in this efficiency category are how we run the airport in particular. And some of our plans over the next 15 years are about increasing efficiency so that we can at least accommodate the same relative amount of operations, but use less energy, use less fuel, and therefore emit less noise and air pollution. The second part is electrification. We need to figure out how to electrify everything we can possibly electrify. Our facilities, eventually, ideally, our planes, if that's possible, as was mentioned. And then the third is the alternatives. So what can we use other than fossil fuel, which is not only the worst possible for greenhouse gas emissions, but also for local particulate emissions. And so we have, and we are walking and chewing gum at the same time. So we're doing all these efficiency and electrification efforts while at the same time being the national leader on sustainable aviation fuel amongst, quite honestly, nearly any other large hub airport. And we're doing that through not only supporting the science to develop these fuels, but also then figuring out the logistics and infrastructure necessary to bring these into SEA and displace the fossil fuels, which are the most polluting. So I think for us, we're thinking about both environmental and local air pollution impacts through those three lenses and working in all of those areas to try to address it.
Thank you to our panelists. Now we will move on to
We'll
questions.
start with her. Oh, okay. We'll start with you. My neighbors asked me to be here. Everybody's out of town. neighbors in Redondo, Woodmont, Saltwater State Park, Zenith, we're all getting together because we're all finding black stuff on everything. So anyway, when will someone step up and stop Delta several times a day, at least a dozen, when they're landing over us, Saltwater State Park, and Canada Air once a day, from lowering wheels over us since COVID shut down. Approximately in 2026, 64 times we have recorded flights over Redondo, Woodmont, Saltwater State Park, mostly, and Zenith. We have submitted complaints to council. Mr. Edwards at the port, he has been so nice. I have photographs of what the deposits look like of the gear oil. They used to be like in big globs. My cat used to love laying on the deck. He got oil on him, he licked himself, was poisoned and died. Mr. Edwards somehow has contacted Delta, and they started flying higher, coming in higher, over 1,000 feet. And now it comes down as a spray. I have photographs of what it looks like now and what it looked like before. So, over our furniture, our deck, poisoning my cat, to spray over everything, because now they come in higher. We used to plant tomatoes, fruits, we can no longer. Neighbors are finding that black stuff everywhere. We had a long, about 50 people commented on a thread in Des Moines. I think
So is
I
this
tagged you,
something,
Tina,
is this something that just started happening? Or is
after
it-
COVID shut down. Before, it
What-
was,
So what are they doing different?
Okay.
Why-
they're lowering wheels over us. I
Soon.
think Saltwater State Park is like their target area or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, that black stuff is everywhere, and we have samples. We have been, my neighbor next door, his skylights covered. My son, cleaned the, deck cover, last Saturday, and I took pictures right away, right after he got done cleaning. You could see, I have photographs of it, oil everywhere, spray everywhere. So,
What,
please
And the
help
planes
us.
and the planes are bigger.
Yes.
Yeah, the planes are bigger.
We're not, you know, I mean, we even have a new, owner that just purchased in March. He came to me because we ran into each other at the mailboxes. And he told me, what, do you know what that black stuff is all over my skyline? I said, oh, I have news for you.
well, I don't know anything about this, but if we,
That's the first I've heard of it too, but this is excellent input
Yeah.
in terms of maybe there's a.
Please help us.
We're live now. I'm gonna get your name afterwards. and
Thank you.
Follow up with you to see if
Thank
there's an
you.
operational change that we can encourage pilots to make that would, not
Please.
going to daily configuration.
Oh, Amazon
jobs,
and
yes.
Federal Express come in like only a minute away over Federal Way Commercial, I-599, and much higher.
So you're saying they're
That's where they
operating the
lower,
way that-
that's where they lower, they come in, wheels already lowered, that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Okay.
All other airlines, even European, all of them, China, all of them,
Yeah,
come in with wheels already lowered.
and I live in that community and our windowsills are covered with black.
Yep.
And yeah, would love to be part of that conversation.
So now you know what it is.
We're taking notes, thank you.
Thank you so much, appreciate it. They're gonna be so happy that I talked to you today.
Thank you.
I think it's working.
Good afternoon, my name's Jim, I'm a homeowner that almost lives in Sea-Tac, over the border in Burien. I love riding my bike at the North Sea-Tac Park, so I appreciate the efforts you've put into that. I also appreciate the efforts that you've put in to try to mitigate a situation that probably isn't gonna change, and we know it's gonna get 30% worse. And then the good news is, it's done. However, I do wanna ask a couple questions about mitigation. One is personal mitigation. I personally taken advantage of the port package. I appreciate that. It has made a difference. But if there's other things the port could help me with personal mitigation, help me keep my air cleaner fresh every year, maintaining my equipment, making sure my windows and doors stay the same, and also help me keep my house more insulated than what it is. I suggest that could be done possibly two ways, individual grants to homeowners, or you could mitigate the property tax that we pay to the port. So I want to suggest that as possibilities and for your consideration. And then I'm kind of interested in larger mitigations, stuff that the port would do, you know, building sound barriers and whatever. What can we do to get a bigger piece of the pie? Because we're obviously not getting what we deserve. So as a group or an individual, what would help? Letter writing, anything else? I'm kind of interested in what we can do as individuals, because we certainly should get more money out of this. So those are my two questions on mitigation.
I want to thank you.
Mike.
I'm afraid I'm just going to feedback again. Okay. That was very sensitive. Thanks for your input. Your comments reflect some of what we heard in the public hearing just a couple of weeks ago too, in terms of questions around compensation. You've introduced two new ideas that I want to go back and research, see if that would be possible. Both around the potential ongoing support for things like replacing air filters, and then also the tax mitigation. There, I believe, and this would be Tina's book of business, but in terms of the way property taxes are levied in Washington State, there are a couple of carve-outs that allow for, you know, sort of addressing, let's say, seeing low-income seniors, I think, receive a carve-out. There's a family and veterans credit. So there might be an angle there where, you know, at the state, we could be given the authority to do something like that. And that would definitely be one of those opportunities for the port and the cities to go together to advocate for that kind of change.
No, I think you raised some excellent points. I do think there's property taxes local and there's state. And so I would hope we would look at both, because a large percentage of our property tax that is levied by the port goes for other purposes and not to mitigation for our community. So I think we should look at both. I do think, especially as we start seeing warmer weather, I think packages, one is the noise, and we have a lot of failed packages that have not been fixed, so that's a priority. But also people can't open their windows like other areas, and so we're gonna need to look at heat pumps and cooling systems, because people can't open windows to get cool air in. So I do think the needs around mitigation are growing as the weather changes and we're getting more and more flights. You know, I know in the evening, it's like every 40 seconds on the third runway during peak hours. So it's very heavy and pretty relentless. And so we really need our windows closed and our air quality good.
Thanks. It's primarily local stuff. In federal level, we try to pump as much money as we could in the FAA for noise mitigation, and it's a matter of, I mean, there are a lot of airport impacted communities in the country, and then we're out there scrambling to try to get as much as we can for us. We're able to get that pilot project, as I said, for noise mitigation. Before it was, once they gave it a filter barrier, even if they got the noise thing wrong, once they built one, that was it. You know, there was no availability for federal funds, so we did get a pilot project for a few airports, including Sea-Tac, where they could come in and spend more money to upgrade noise mitigation that's been done. And then it's just a matter of fighting for federal funds, which I will continue to do aggressively.
Thank you. Brian Davis, I'm the Vice Chair of the Bureau and Airport Committee. Thank you very much for this opportunity to engage. We really appreciate it. The 65 DLNL standard, it's a joke. It's based on outdated, archaic science that was imposed in 1979. And contemporary science tells us that we've learned an awful lot in these last 50 years, not quite. Even if you stick with the day-night, you know, the average, 65 is way too high. The EPA sets 55 as the proper DLNL standard. The World Health Organization says 40 is actually the threshold for harm from noise. So there is that. And then the other thing that the DLNL standard does not consider is cumulative impact. You know, we're looking here through this stamp. If you get to where we think we're going, there's going to be 1,500 takeoffs and landings every day. And yet the DLNL standard gives the same weight to that as it does to, say, 100 takeoffs and landings a day at Painfield and Everett. It just doesn't make any sense. You know, the people that live in Boulevard Park and in Cedarhurst under the flight path, they're getting pounded. And there is no recognition of that in the law. And that's, unfortunately, I mean, I know that the last reauthorization bill, there's supposed to be a complete review of the FAA noise standards, but President Trump has got to appoint a committee, and we're probably not going to see that happen. So we're talking years before there is any relief in code. So the question then becomes, while we're in that interim phase, and the same applies to sustainable aviation fuel as well, it's decades away from widespread viability. What do we do in the meantime for the people that are really paying the disproportionate price for the necessary growth of the airport? We're not trying to stop anything, you know, but we are looking for proper compensation for the people who pay disproportionate price for the growth of the airport. And the noise standard thing, that's a real tricky one. I don't know, you know, what would you suggest on that?
On the noise standard piece, all we do is restudy it and get to a different conclusion, which is what we put in the bill. And you're right, it takes too long. But that's the first step, is getting a conclusive study that, which is a conclusion you said, and allows for mitigation at a lower decibel level. And that's the step that we took. As far as the other piece of this, and it goes to the previous question, yeah, you know, we've been arguing about this for decades, that people moving around the airport should get some compensation for the fact that they're absorbing a higher cost and having an airport in the region. And I think tax breaks, certainly around property taxes, would be the place to go.
The thing I would add to that on the 65 DNL, which we're all agreeing is not adequate, is there's nothing to say that when we use other sources that are not federal dollars, that we have to stand to that threshold. So when we did state dollars and looked at it in our bills, you know, we said any failed work packages, regardless of the 65 DNL. And when they did the Part 150 and then they changed the routing, there's people who have no noise packages. And so there are dollars like our local property taxes, aviation fuels, taxes. I think that would be a good nexus for some of that dollars to come back to our community. All of those could be used for noise and air quality without changes at the federal level, as long as we're not tapping the federal dollars.
I totally agree. Brian, I think you are an incredible advocate for this, and I hope that you would join us in going back to DC. This has been our top federal priority on noise questions. We're a great storyteller, and you both bring the personal and the technical. And so, you know, as we go back to advocate for this, I know we've had some successful DC flyouts all together, and we should keep doing that, because that is how we're going to move it quicker, for sure. And then on the question of funding some of this stuff, yeah, I mean, I think it's a conversation between local and state government to find new sources of funds to do this. From the port standpoint, you know, we recognize the need to use what we have to create the biggest impacts for our communities. And so, you know, we regularly have conversations around, we've got a super fund in New Hampshire that we're going to be funding. We've got questions around the airport impact to communities. We've got derelict vessels at Fisherman's Terminal, and we're trying to do our best to say, you know, these are not apples to apples comparisons, but how do we do our best with the resources we have to do as much good as we can with that limited funding.
Hello, my name is William Kelly, and I'm a correspondent of the King County International Airport Community Coalition, KCIACCC, and we organize against leaded aviation fuel. We have been told that the planes flying overhead are contaminating our communities with lead. It makes all of our hearts break, knowing it is not only this place. Environmental injustice, let us not be reluctant. Build outrage for social change, hence we need to educate. This recreational hobby, putting lead in our bodies, what will you say to them? How will you take action? It's the last remaining transportation fuel that contains lead. And I've watched, and it's the single piston planes. I've yet to do the survey, but a lot. I understand some of it's used for flight school, but a lot of it is used for recreational flights. And no amount of lead is safe for anyone. And it's very bad for childhood development in particular. So my question is there a plan to phase it out? How is it going with that? Because no amount of lead is safe. And environmental injustice is clear in the face, that people, recreational flying, more privilege, putting lead in the people below, because it's reality that people who live closer to industries tend to have cheaper rent, and it's just reality. But like, I'm asking, is there any forms of mitigation, plans of phasing out, or has there been any research to maybe give them air filters or anything along those lines, mitigation for lead exposure? In particular, South King County, Auburn Airport especially, and King County International Airport Coalition. King County International Airport.
So just so to be clear here, the smaller planes still have leaded fuel?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, a single engine plane. Here's, we can have more information. Charles.
Okay. No, given the ignorance here, I was not aware of that, but yeah, I know we have Renton Airport, Auburn Airport, and other things. I will need to get educated on it, and we will see what we can do. I don't know if the board members knows any more details about that too, right?
I know Representative DeLeo, who serves in the 22nd LD, has introduced legislation to require removing the lead in the fuels for smaller aircrafts. I will have to go back and see if that passed, or I think it had a projected date to allow the engines to kind of transition, but I can check on that for you, and I agree, there's no safe level of lead.
We should absolutely mandate getting rid of lead out of all fuels.
Oh, yes, because we did it with, I'll use my information.
And just to assuage any concerns about SCA, we do not have leaded fuel in our facilities. I guess the only instance would be if some small plane needed like an emergency landing at SCA, there might be an instance, but we do not fuel with leaded fuel here.
Like, one thing that
I think we should probably keep moving on. Because we've got
Oh, yeah,
to
yeah,
move on.
I'm sorry.
I think William has raised a really important point.
Thank you all for holding this today. I'm Catherine Caffrey. I'm the city manager for the city of Des Moines. Des Moines, Burien, and Sea-Tac as city governments are working together, as you know, Commissioner, to appeal what's going on right now with the SAMP. And what I want to highlight for you is I feel like we're hearing a lot about mitigation, and I've sort of heard behind the scenes that the commission isn't clear on what the cities are asking for. And so I want you to be aware that the cities have provided a 17-page document that is not as long and painful to read as 17 pages sounds, clearly identifying very specific items we're looking for. Things like a recurring community impact fund. You know, you mentioned the South King County grants. We appreciate them. Des Moines has benefited from them, but they are one time. And candidly, they are a tiny amount of money in the scheme of what the projects outlined in the SAMP are gonna cost. So we've put down a recurring community impact fund is on the list. We've put down things when cities are being forced to take on costs in order to meet regulatory requirements because we're close to the airport. I mean, there are real items that the cities have to do because we're near you, and those are costs the cities bear. That seems like low-hanging fruit that the port should be covering those costs. So I guess my question or request is, if you're not aware of this 17-page, but you know, there's spaces in there and they're numbered items. There's really, I think, probably like a dozen items on there. But we have provided this document to port staff and port council, and I don't always have full confidence that the commission sees it. And as the real decision makers, if you haven't seen a copy, I would really ask that you ask support staff to provide you with it, because I think it really tells you what at least these 3 cities collectively are looking for. Thank you.
If you send something to my email, I will read it.
Okay.
So calkins.r@portseattle.org. I will read that, and I have seen your document. And it was not tough to consume. It was, so thank you for sending that directly and for the clarification on that. But quite honestly, if you send it to me directly, I'm gonna read it, and certainly coming from a position, a person in a position.
Good afternoon, my name is Barbara McMichael. I am one of the many co-founders of Defenders of Highline Forest. I'm a cancer survivor so far, and I live directly underneath the approach to the second runway. We bought our house because we're starving artists and we could afford it 28 years ago. At that time, there were fewer flights, and it had a relatively new port package, which is now, of course, failing us. So, my question, I guess, is, I heard you talk about, and I am sympathetic to our fast-paced world and the idea of walking and chewing gum at the same time, trying to solve all of these problems, put out the fires, which literally are happening all around us with climate change. And I also heard Congressman Smith talk about renewing our commitment to the environment. So this is a question that's kind of 30,000-foot level question, a holistic question, asking you as leaders really to consider your role in as you serve our communities, how you are also dealing with that larger threat that we are facing existentially. So when I heard an oxymoron, how does airport expansion renew our commitment to the environment? The STAMP and the SEPA say the only impacts are going to be traffic. And clearly there are lots of people here today who are pointing out many other impacts. So I would really love to hear from each of you 3 electeds, how, on a large level, on a high level, how does the STAMP renew a commitment
Sure.
to the environment? Thank you.
Well, the SAM doesn't renew our commitment to the environment. What renews our commitment to the environment is figuring out how we're going to accommodate all of the needs of people in a more environmentally friendly way, okay? And look, I mean, if all we cared about was the environment, we'd get rid of all automobiles all across the world tomorrow. You know, there's all kinds of things we get rid of. But what we're trying to balance is, you know, humans have to live. I don't have to, but I'm in favor of it. I'm in favor of civil society. So how do we make this work? And look, I got to tell you, this is going to be a little bit of a rant here. I'm very frustrated because it's a very simple thing. Digging up fossil fuels from below the ground and burning them is bad for life. It's bad for air quality, it's bad for water quality. We get into this esoteric debate. Sorry, wrong way to put this, but climate change. People are debating, well, it's hot and it's cold. It's simple. Digging up fossil fuels from below the ground and burning them is bad for life. And if we keep doing it, life isn't going to be able to survive. So I don't want to see all these right-wing conservatives, doing this deep dive of how the science is wrong, whatever. Let's just admit we need to try and get off of fossil fuels. And the frustrating part about it for me, threefold. One, we can do it. Technology is developing, it is moving forward. I mean, 25 years ago, when I was having this conversation, we talk about wind and solar. The people who didn't want to deal at all. It's way more expensive than that. That'll never work. Well, now it's cheaper. Okay, it doesn't solve the entire problem. But think of how much energy we're now able to generate from wind and solar because we made the investment, we made the commitment, figuring it out, we made it better. All right, nuclear power. We figured out a whole lot of things about it that can make it safer and more effective as well. Fusion, believe it or not, is close, okay? There's Helion, it's a company up in Orwall, that is going to be powering all of Microsoft's campus in 2028 through fusion technology. And if you unlock fusion, that gets you so far. If we would just make the investment in this, now airplanes are a particular challenge, okay? Because they can't break down. We really need to make sure that they work. But even there, alternative fuels can be developed. Electric planes can be developed. And then if we have fusion in nuclear and other sources of fuel, it gives their energy efficiencies. Ways to get the same output out of the same use of energy. We're talking about data centers. There's technology now that can enable you to put a data center up in space that is perpetually, basically, run by solar power. Meaning, we have the technology, we have the ability to make amazing breakthroughs and get after that core environmental problem, which is relying on fossil fuels. And yes, living under the airport is terrible, but what if all of the vehicles on the roads around you were electric? What if you at least could take that portion of pollution off the table entirely for your community? It would be an incredible advancement. We have the ability to do that. And here's where I sort of get into my, I really hate extremism in politics. I realize that practical problem solving is boring and frustrating, but really that's the only way to advance. There is no magic ideology out there that's going to solve all these problems. People have been looking for several hundred years, it never works. So work within our system, let's go fix it. And the two sides of the argument that frustrate me the most, on the right, do you realize that in the 2008 presidential campaign, John McCain and Sarah Palin had climate change and global warming as a concern and an issue that they wanted to address? Okay? Republicans. But then Barack Obama won, and since he decided he was going to do something about it, conservatives decided that it had to be the worst thing in the world. And so then Donald Trump went off on his own little rant about the whole thing. And so now you've got Republicans say it's their God-given right to burn whatever fuel they want to burn for as long as they want to burn and dig it up. It didn't used to be that way. Okay? And then on our side, the moral superiority, the looking down upon anyone who disagrees with you, it's a real problem. Okay? Walking up to somebody driving a car and screaming at them, telling them that they're awful, horrible, terrible people because they want to destroy the environment, does not grow your support. I don't know where we got this idea that the first thing you have to do to persuade people is establish your moral superiority, act as sanctimonious as possible, and make sure that anyone who disagrees with you must be just a terrible, awful, horrible human being, and then everyone will agree with you. That's the way it works, right? No, it's not the way it works, okay? People have legitimate concerns. You come into a community that 95% of their fuel comes from fossil fuels, and you say, we're going to get rid of all of that. And they're like, okay, how am I going to heat my house? How am I going to get to work? There are answers to those questions. There are. But you have to be patient enough to listen to people's concerns to bring them along to the idea that you're committed to answering that. Now, there are some environmental groups that are doing this. The Climate Action Group that's organized around here that has aggressively gone out into conservative communities and had honest conversations at how do we get there. This is what I mean by saying we need to renew our commitment to the environment. Because right now, we've got the right wing that's decided it's relevant, we've got the left wing that's decided that the right wing are awful, terrible, horrible because of that. We've got to do better than that. So no, the action, that's what I forget what SAM stands for, but anyway, it's not going to be the environment, but it does recognize the need for air travel and all that. We just need to do it safer and cleaner and better, and we can. If we just make the investment and the commitment into new technologies to help protect people. So, that's my longest answer today, but that I think is really how we need to start thinking about the environment in a way that can get us to a better place.
Thank you.
I guess I would say again, back to Sam, I don't think it does any mitigation around human or environmental impacts. And, I think there is exciting things in the future. I can see electric hoppers moving people on short-term flights, obviously the cleaner energy. I just think there's so much overwhelmed and suffering in our community right now around the short term. And, it's hard when we have, a large entity that we know, I don't know, is a $1.2 billion budget. It's a large budget that they have, and knowing that there's so little that gets invested back when you are our community. A lot of your employees live here, we're your partners, and so again, I do think there's really exciting things off in the future that we should all be working on, but not to forget what we can be doing now to reduce the harm.
I guess I if I didn't get a chance to answer this, I was going to be upset. This is why I got into politics 8.5 years ago, because I believe that we're at an inflection point where we are making this transition from a fossil economy to a new energy economy. And I will beg to differ with Brian. I think we are closer than you think we are on staff. I think there will be tipping point moments in that. No thanks to the current federal administration in the United States that put us back a number of years. But we can see it happening in other pockets, and that kind of both development on the science and technology side, but also on the infrastructure side, we're going to start to see it bridge the gap between the cost of fossil jet and staff, and it will make an enormous impact. But I also, just as a stock clock is right twice a day, this administration does get one thing right about energy, which is increasing energy affordability has had enormous net benefits to humanity over the course of the 20th century. It has driven down poverty. It makes everything cheaper. Your food, because of inputs like fertilizer and transportation, your housing, your utility. Energy is the indispensable ingredient in every economic transaction. And so if you can make energy cheaper, that is a net good for almost all of us. The problem is their method for going about energy affordability is to say, damn the rules, don't worry about the consequences, dig up all the dirty fossil fuels and burn them as if it's going out of style. Instead of doing the hard work, which is to say, pumping the money into the research and development that we need for solar and wind and geothermal and new nuclear, fusion and fission, and developing the kind of battery energy storage systems that we need to get to the point where we can fly large electric planes. We can do this, and I think it can happen in a relatively short, I want to see big electric planes before I die. Now, how does an airport like SEA support that kind of work? We know that we can have a real impact on pulling staff to SEA first. And we are putting time and money into that effort to get it here ahead of other airports that would be interested in it as well. And we do face headwinds because of the federal administration, but we aren't giving up. And I think the other thing that does is there's nothing, one of my favorite expressions is there's nothing like the guillotine to sharpen the mind. It's a sort of convoluted way of saying deadlines work. And so we set a deadline for ourselves, 10% staff at SEA by 2028. And the clock is ticking. And about 4 years ago, our brilliant expert on staff came to us and said, we're doing everything we can, but the infrastructure around us is a little bit delayed. However, I have a proposal. Our goal is GHG reduction. So if we don't meet that 10% target, can we put a number on what that would mean in terms of GHG reduction and get there in other ways? We said, yes, that'll help us benchmark. We're not going to give up on staff. We're going to keep benchmarking that. And so they enacted a program of other means of GHG reduction at the airport, including a program in which when pilots land, they are counseled on how to turn off their auxiliary power units, which is a diesel generator at the back of the plane that runs the plane if they choose not to plug it into the airport. And we said, use our electricity instead of your diesel. We've done a number of other things, including changing out HVACs and other smaller things that all have built up to actually a larger reduction in GHG emissions that we had anticipated from our staff group. So it's a both and thing where we said we're going to set a metric for ourselves and we're going to go for it. And I guess I'm a perennial optimist, right? So I still think we can do this, and I'm close to the science on this. I believe it's possible, and it is going to take resources. And again, we're having to kind of spread our resources, but that for me is a major focus: is how do we get staff into SEA at a blend first, but eventually reaching towards those goals of 50% and higher.
Thank you to our panelists. I do just want to mention that we only have about 5 minutes left in today's forum, so we might only have time for one question. But if you do have follow-up questions for the forum, please feel free to find one of our staff members, and we will do our best to answer that after.
All right, so I jumped up quick enough. Thank you for being here. Thanks for answering questions. My name is Katie Cressley. I'm with the Highland Journal. I live in Sea-Tac. Fortunately, my husband's smart enough. The airplanes don't fly over us. We're perpendicular. But I do know a lot of people, and I look at the number of schools that are below the flight path and people that live. And it gets loud and it gets dirty. But the first thing I want to mention, I pay attention to the Highland schools. I ran for school board because kids can't speak for themselves. They really need our help. What I noticed was that there are a number of schools that 25 years ago, at least $100 million was earmarked for mitigation, for noise mitigation. I don't know if any of that had to do with what we're learning right now about the air quality. I don't know if that includes purifiers. $100 million 25 years ago doesn't go as long as it does now. They've only done 11 of the 15 schools, according to the port data. I'm kind of curious what kind of, number one, pressure that can be put on the schools to get those completed. I know that it seems like they're waiting for the bonds to come through for rebuilds, but maybe there's some noise and air quality mitigation that can be done in the meantime. That's kind of the main thing, is what can be done, what can the Highland schools, and what can you guys do, and does the port have any more money in mind for FAA? Thank you.
Thank you, that's a great question. My daughter's a teacher in the Highline School District. In fact, we're one of the landing paths at Parkside, and you can almost overlay the kids going to emergency departments with that path landing. And so one of the things I worked on with Senator Kaiser was to get funding for HEPA filters, and we worked with the cities as well. And so a lot of our schools in Highline, but not all of them, have got the freestanding purifiers, and those are the ones that University of Washington say are effective in getting rid of 75 to 80% of the ultrafine particles. They do find even the newer schools with the HVAC systems, even if they've emerged 13, are not that effective of getting rid of the ultrafine particles. So again, I think one of our goals should be to get more of those purifiers into the classroom as well as the filter replacements. I'll let you talk about the packages.
Yeah, well, I wanted to also, and maybe Congressman Smith could share some more details on this, but in that 2024 FAA reauthorization, we did fund a study to understand, as Congressman Smith has mentioned, first step is getting the science, getting the benchmarks so we can understand how to address it. So that's in process, obviously not moving as fast as we'd all like it to, but that was a huge step forward, so kudos to Congressman Smith for that. There's also a number of already passed capital budget allowances for the state to implement some of these programs, both in ecology. So I don't know the exact numbers on it, but there are some funds out there. And your point about, is there anything we can do to sort of help the school districts accelerate the adoption of these things? Let me know if we can nudge in any way. But yeah, for sure.
I do want to respond to the study. So the University of Washington is one of the top institutions in the country, if not the world.
I don't know who you're talking about.
So, there has been studies done. Do we want further studies? Obviously you should keep building on it, but they have pretty well documented a lot of this work already, and our Department of Health looking at health impacts. Do they, they've studied in Boston and LAX, and so I think we're learning more and more. And so I just hate for us to stall on mitigation, waiting for more research when we do have one of the top institutions in the country supporting this work.
I just want to, real quick, that's the question I wanted to ask, thank you. I understand about the schools, but what about when the kids are at home and they're playing outside? Do we have any programs ready for that? I mean, can we get them, because the kids are coming to school with the chronic coughs.
That's right. No, it's a good point. And so what we've been doing is we've been looking at, could we use some funding that we could all get together to do more indoor recreation areas for our kids, more drop-in centers. There was a new soccer facility in Tukwila that we helped fund. So, and also greenhouses. I know there's been gardens that have been sponsored, but then they find the soil is toxic, and so we probably need other kind of interventions that make more sense for our airport communities. Thank you.
Yes, and that concludes the forum today. That was all what we had time for today. I do just want to, in case any of our panelists have any final things to say, you're welcome to share, but that should be the end of today. Thank you all for coming, and like I said, if you have follow-up questions,